than ever, public policies in education has a much more relation or correlation with life, and its preservation more than the physical thing, right, or aspect. The political dispute now lies in the subjectivation of how we do that. How do we live in different countries? How we deal with the problems that we have with our students in the case of education. So the political dispute, and so for us in Valparaiso means something related with biopolitics, right? In which we can recognize there are different options for of subjectivations for these purposes. So we can think of the Thanatonic or Thanatopolitic for the Nazism, for example, that seeks a total human confinement, leading to exterminations, the Nazis or the infected people, right? And the immunity in solitude now is the point that they put as the main purposes of this pandemic, to be alone and try to survive it by yourself. So in this aspect, our students here in Valparaiso, for example, which is a very poor city, there is no choice. They don't have enough money, for example, because they eat most of them at school, at the public schools. So to be now in their school means maybe die because of hungry. So it's much more than to talk about education in terms of how to teach something, right? For us, it's more than that. So in Valparaiso, we are working in a model of public education, which is a little bit different, which is focused on life of our students. So that's why it's not a great problem today to deal with this problem with our students. So the teachers are prepared to keep their relation with the students through different ways. So we're working through internet, what is one of the most typical, platform or websites or different kinds of tools that they have in their schools. But also they are giving some materials or some guides or some printed material each week at schools. And for that's what for the thing that I want to say, that it's today we need as a public education, or at least our idea here in Valpo, it's to survive this neoliberal society that we have in Chile, because you know that we are the lab on neoliberalism. So we have an absence of collective work. We have also reproduction of life in a same logic of competition, right? An insane logic of competition, individualization, material accumulation. So that's why the emergence of a virus puts us at the limit of a recognition of life, and in a political dispute in the type of modern nation and state that we need as human beings. So we bet on the autonomy and community of our lives, and its reproduction, of course. So the public education for us in Chile, because it's deeply centralized and also standardized planning, hierarchical and control, that's also include, as any part of other countries, individual incentives or awards for workers, teachers, or professionals. We need to finish with this, because we are now focused on the life of our students And we have a great reason to keep that motivation and link with the students and their families. So our proposal here is to have a new model of public education that we have been developed in co-built with teachers, academics, activists, and of course us as institutions. For us is so important these days because we haven't had so much problems because the model here has different areas. For example, we consider evaluation or assessment for learning. It's not, I mean, just a matter of results, right? And we also incorporate indeed the quality assessment of a student's progress based on dialogical learning experiences. So also teachers' development work is professional learning. It's with professional learning communities that solve all the problems associated with pedagogy in the community. So this is now in a crisis context, it's much more necessary than in normal times, right? So for us, it's not a great problem to be working with the same model. On the other hand, for us, the curriculum is for life. So that means that we need to guarantee the right of the students to be literate, and especially in functional areas of their lives, and of course, and give them the improvement of necessary for that. That implies, of course, a critical pedagogy that brings to the distinctions of reality and their struggles that they have every day in these poor areas. We also have development. We also have another area that we have been developed that it's related with the school coexistence that contest logical relationships and understand that citizens or citizenships is a form of a democratic relation. And we don't understand that democracy is just a matter of a government, to have a kind of government. It's a matter of a relationship. So for that, we need now the opportunity to have another kinds of communities and another kind of links. So that's why for us, we haven't changed our public policy in education in Valparaiso. So we have been working in the same way, but of course, our main problems are the limits or the material limits that we have, especially related with hungry in the case of our students, right? Because the state or the government doesn't have the focus on life, even for the citizens in general or our students at schools. So we're trying to form different kinds of communities in different areas in Valparaiso. You know that Valparaiso is a big city. I mean, geography, it's a little bit hard. We have 42 different hills, so it's a little bit complicated. So
Silviana,
we are trying.
I'm going to ask you to summarize your thoughts so that we can.
So we are working on having the territory link at the same as we are working with the students. That's it.
Thank you so much, Silvana. So I didn't mean to cut off your last thought there. Thank you for presenting. For people who have just come on to the call, Silvana is the Minister of Education in Valparaiso, Chile, and they've been doing some really important work there along pedagogical lines. How should what education should look like in our society? So thank you very much for being on this call with us. Our next speaker, if you are ready, is Julia. I don't see, oh, there you are. Sorry, I was looking at the bottom. Julia Mccray is from Vancouver. She's a secondary English and Spanish teacher who is actually on leave from the classroom right now to be the first vice president of the Surrey Teachers Association, which is, for people who aren't familiar, it's the largest teacher local in British Columbia that has almost 6,000 members. Thank you so much, Julia. Please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Thanks. Sorry, I forgot about the muting and the unmuting. Hi, everybody. Thanks for inviting me to the panel, Mercedes. Things are probably different in Canada than in the US and in other countries, but some things the same. Now, just for a little context, education is organized provincially in Canada. So each province has its own Minister of Education and its own education system, its own curriculum, its own processes. So there's no federal Minister of Education at all, and there's no federal funding for education except for to provide French, supplement French immersion and that type of thing in education systems. In British Columbia, we have a left-wing government, which we helped elect 2 years ago, and so there's been quite. I'm gonna judge it as a reasonable response to the pandemic on the part of the government, and everything seems to be starting from the public health officer, and all the laws and rules that are being laid down by the government and in the education system are governed by science. So that is good, I think. So we had in Surrey, where there's 140 schools, 140 work sites for our members. And before spring break, which started on March 13th, yesterday was the last day of spring break, there were 3 schools that had some kind of an outbreak reported, and those 3 schools closed for 1 day each for a so-called deep clean, and then they reopened. But when they reopened, almost no kids came to them, and it was like in the last couple days before spring break. So some people were just like, okay, we're having early spring break, I don't know about the cleaning, I'm not bringing my kids back. So but it was interesting how quickly the school district decided to close schools. That was very surprising to us at the time. It certainly got our attention. And then when the schools closed for spring break, almost the next day it was announced that they wouldn't be reopening afterwards. So that was it was just a complete coincidence in a way that was when spring break was. So lucky coincidence, for us. Now, since then, it's been announced that they won't reopen, and teachers will be providing remote schooling. And so that's not necessarily online. It might be some people will prepare packages of printed things that families can pick up at the schools. But the good thing is in my opinion, the good thing is that the government and the local district authorities, in my district at least, have been in really close communication with the unions, with all the partners in the education. And that's been really great to see them roll out a good system. So on Monday, we're going to have the first day back, but the students are not allowed to show up at the schools, and the teachers are not allowed to show up at the schools. They have to be at home, and they will have a whole week of meetings. They'll be online in small groups and large groups with their staff, there'll be all different things will be happening where they try and get themselves organized to be able to communicate with all the parents and kids by the end of the week, how it's going to start the following week with some kind of online or remote education. And they're not dictating the platform that they should use. They're not dictating how it should be rolled out. They're saying, okay, if you teach kindergarten, it might be this way, or you think of what you want to do. Like, you go crazy, be creative, try and figure out what you're going to do. And I think that's excellent because it just promotes teacher autonomy. It enhances the strong teacher autonomy that we already have in our contract, and that we've been fighting to promote for years and years and years. So luckily we have a very professional and autonomous teacher workforce, and now all those strengths are really coming into play. So I'm pleased about that. Let's see, maybe I'll just talk about the pandemic a little bit here. I think there's about 700 cases. I think there's been 14 people die in British Columbia, and most of them have been in care homes, which has been interesting because they were started in one particular care home. There were quite a few cases and quite a few deaths, and then it's moved around to other care homes, which shows you that there's people going to different care homes, and those people are workers, and those workers, their union was attacked by the last government in 2002 and was destroyed by that government, and those workers were converted to minimum wage workers. And now they've reorganized, they're back in a union, there's been a long process of fighting back against that attack, but now we see the reason why that attack was terrible, that those people are still marginalized workers and are trying to have a full-time job by working in different care homes. So that's been really tragic to see. In our province, there's been a new curriculum rolled out over the last 5 years, and it is very teacher autonomous based. It's been, you can really have your own interpretation of the curriculum. And now this is, I kind of think this is if there's any kind of silver lining in this horrible situation, it's that so many teachers are going to have original ideas that they're trying out with their students online or remotely, and they're thinking for themselves and interacting with their kids in a different personal kind of way than they maybe did before. So I think that could be good, but I think it's going to be really difficult for many people to reach all the kids. I'm quite worried about, many teachers are just heartbroken to think of how many kids aren't going to have what they need from schools now coming up. They're going to be so isolated, they won't have access to some food programs, although food programs are not such a big thing in Canada. We're very worried about what's going to happen to special education kids who are living with very difficult disabilities or problems. How are they going to get support from teachers? I'm not a specialist in that area, and I'm sure that the special ed teachers in my district or in my province are thinking of all kinds of great things, but a lot of people are worried about what's happening to those parents who normally have a 5 or 6 hour respite from caring for their severely disabled children during a school day, and now they're not going to have that. So how is that support going to be rolled out? We're very worried about mental health of kids, and we think that seeing the faces of the teachers speaking to them in whatever format that they do is going to be really helpful to them, to help them feel reconnected with their school community and be able to work on some ideas instead of just witnessing worry in their home. But of course, the biggest problem that we think we have is kids who don't have any access to the internet or any kind of devices, and how are they going to interact with their class or interact with their teacher at all? Some of it will just be over the phone, but then some don't even have a phone. And then, so difficult.
Julia, if you could start to summarize your thoughts.
Yeah, I guess I'll say one thing I noticed that was really great is now in all the news reports, we're not talking about taxpayers and consumers anymore. We're talking about workers. I thought that's great. It seems like all of a sudden the workers exist. Ha! That was good. I'll say that when it comes to online meetings in our union, for example, we've had several meetings this last week. We're really good at having meetings because we're already organized. So Zoom meetings are going really well. We know how to chair meetings, how to organize meetings. That's going really well. Our social media saturation communication among members is way up. Like, we have way more people wanting to join our Facebook groups and find out what's going on. And coincidental with this, we just got a deal. We just negotiated a deal with the government for our next 3-year contract. We've been in negotiations for more than a year, and it's a little victory in the middle of all this darkness. Just happened this last Friday. So I can comment more about all these things if people are interested, and thanks very much for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Julia, for your comments. So my understanding is that the next 2 speakers, Karen Marshall, I'll introduce her, and she's going to be splitting her time with a colleague, Adrienne Dixon, who's also from New Orleans. Karen Marshall is from Rethink New Orleans, which is a youth advocacy organization, and Karen is going to be speaking about student struggles under decentralized, privatized education, as well as teacher struggles in New Orleans. Karen, if you wouldn't mind, when you split your time, since I don't know Adrienne, maybe you can introduce Adrienne so that we can know more about who Adrienne is. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Adrienne Dixon, what's up, Adrienne? Hello, everyone. Is from New Orleans. Currently teaches at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Did I get that right? I got that correct. But also still lives in New Orleans while teaching in Illinois. has not only grown up in New Orleans, has taught in New Orleans, very familiar with the education system. Also subs as a teacher in New Orleans currently. Is like incredibly supportive of the Black young people who organize with Rethink, and is very familiar with what you could potentially call the system in New Orleans, which, you know, is very different from like other school systems. So we'll tag team if that's cool, Adrian. Word. So overall, I'll say we are a fully privatized school system now. So our school system in New Orleans is 100% charter. It's a totally decentralized school district in that case. And what that means, particularly as it relates to this latest disaster for New Orleans, is that there's no leadership. There's no clear understanding of what should happen and when. For example, like all of you, and I think Julia hit on a number of points that's similar to New Orleans. Our young people are currently supposed to be learning remotely. And that differs by school. How they're learning remotely differs by school, differs by charter, management organization. If they're learning remotely at all, also differs by school and charter management organization. So there's at least one CMO, and CMO stands for Charter Management Organization. There's at least one CMO that just told students that school is finished for the year. They don't have to worry about anything. There's another CMO that has students come and pick up work, like homework packets. They have to come to the school and pick up like homework packets. Other CMOs, at least one other CMO has students on Zoom from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. So like it differs all across the board. Makes it very difficult for students to figure out how to get support. Also, it taxes teachers because there hasn't been any clarity given to teachers as to how they're supposed to be doing this remote learning, given that many of our young people in New Orleans don't have regular access to internet. They don't have, most of the time they access internet either through an out-of-school time program like ours or through their phones. There were some schools, for example, that gave out laptops, but only to seniors. So there's a high school that gave laptops to seniors, but the 9th graders through 11th graders don't have laptops at home and are still trying to figure out how to do work from home. And then from the student side, what we've learned from a lot of our students is that they're struggling. Even some students that actually do pretty well in quote unquote traditional learning environments are struggling heavily in the online environment. It's just not something that they're used to. They're having a difficult time getting in touch with some of their teachers, which actually isn't the fault of the teachers, because what we've learned on the teacher side is that if they're not teaching a classroom, they're in online Zoom meetings for much of the day and are actually not given time to make themselves available to the students. And that's like generally we're just talking about just school and how school is shifted. In a large sense, and in terms of like managing the actual crisis, COVID, like what everybody's spoken to is we're seeing just like laid bare the violence of capitalism, particularly in New Orleans. So many things, we already have like a population that thrives on low wages. We have a tourist-driven economy that doesn't pay. You know, we had to fight to try to get people to get paid $15 an hour, and even then that didn't really move on the state level. So you have many people, one of our parents of one of our Rethink families has been working at the same place for 20 years now and only makes $7 an hour and has no sick leave, so the net effect is you have mass layoffs, which 100,000 people in New Orleans have actually filed for unemployment just in New Orleans so far. And then also you have folks that actually have to risk their health and their lives to go to work to make some kind of money to bring home to their families. And often you have folks that are living in, multi-generational multi-generations living in the same house. So you're exposing, it's not just like them risking themselves, but you're exposing potentially your whole family. And then what that means for young people is that there's like a whole level of anxiety that they're experiencing that for right now, because of the decentralization of schools, privatization, there's no focus on how to support that. Mental health when we were in schools in the traditional sense, and there's even less of a focus of it right now. So I don't want to take up too much time from Adrian, and I'm not really sure how much time we have. So I just want to say, so our looking at this, we looked at overall what we think is going to happen with how the pandemic affects New Orleans. I mean, it's hitting us very, very, very hard right now. Right now, we're leading the world in like deaths per capita and cases per capita. So we're looking at that, and we're looking at like how we can organize. And the young people, we have about 187 young people who are part of, who are organized with Rethink. So I can continue to organize a base of young people, use this as an opportunity for political education so they understand how capitalism works and privatization, and work with like Black teachers to, we might not be able to recapture the schools, the physical school buildings, but we think we can actually, over this time, like recapture schooling and recapture like education. If we can really provide, we've been focusing mainly on providing material needs and organizing folks to provide material needs. And we're very aware that mutual aid is going to require something on a scale that none of us has really practiced before. It can't be 2 or 3 people here, or a couple people over here. We're going to actually have to provide mutual aid on a scale that we just haven't seen before, necessarily in New Orleans, and I would argue in the US. And then we're trying to prepare for what's going to ramp up what we believe is the repression that's going to come to force low income and like wage workers to work in order to maintain the economy. Right now, we already have police trying to enforce curfew in New Orleans and trying to enforce stay at home. The stay at home ruling right now. So we're preparing our young people, we're preparing like our base for how do we address that? How do we protect our people? And how do the things that we're fighting for? So, you know, we have a list of demands. So I don't want to take up too much time, so I could probably put that in the chat, and then I'll let Adrian take it from here.
Thanks, KG. So I'll talk a little bit about what I know about teachers, and I'll just say so I work for, when I'm here, I do substitute formally, and as late as I went back and looked at my text messages, so schools officially, the governor called for schools to be closed on March 16th, effective March 16th. As late as March 13th, I was getting calls to go and sub into schools. So it wasn't like we didn't know that this was coming. So the schools were closed officially because he made an announcement over the weekend. We knew that there were incidences, you know, that it was the community spread was intensifying, and teachers were not coming to school. So let's see, the earliest one that I have when the outbreak got bad was probably around March 6th or 7th. And every day I was asked to come into a school, and I declined because I knew it just wasn't a good, wasn't a good look, and I didn't want to expose myself. But there probably were others who were, and I'll say we were getting calls the morning of, not the night before. So as any, as subbing works in most places, you often just find out that the morning of. So I was getting calls the morning of to just show up whenever I could. It was that desperate for a number of schools. And we've since learned quite a few, not quite a few, there have been several teachers who have died from their exposure to COVID or related to COVID. A number of teachers who would have had exposure to a broad swath of kids. So not just classroom teachers, but coaches, one teacher, one school employee ran the disciplinary room, the
Yep.
suspension.
In school
room?
suspension. Yeah.
So he, clearly would have had access. And this is a school that had a high incidence of, they are known for punishing kids and kids being put in school suspension. So we don't know. And he just died, like last week, KG?
Yeah.
So we don't know the ripple. He just died last week. So probably within the next, by next week, we'll find out if kids have been exposed and the extent to which they've been exposed and then exposed their parents.
Can I
Yep.
add to that, Adrian? So also what's happening with teachers who are either getting sick or who have died, that the schools have not given any information to students or parents at all. So most of the time they find out the same way everybody else does, if it's on the news or if you happen to know somebody who knows somebody or you know the person yourself, but they haven't given students or parents any information, and there's no information on how you get tested if you've been exposed through school.
And also staff. So my son works in a school where there were 2 incidents, and interestingly, where a school where I was asked to come in and sub, and they weren't told. He heard because he works in another kind of ancillary kind of position, and shared with his group of people that he supervises that someone has tested positive, and he was chastised for that he was scaring everyone else and making them uncomfortable. But the fact was that someone had actually been exposed to the virus and it tested positive. And so this was an interest. My son has a master's in public health. So even the staff aren't getting informed. And when the suspension room guy, when he died, the school still didn't share what he had. People actually learned about it in the paper and on Facebook because the school wasn't telling. So it was public information. It wasn't like they were compromising his private health information. The man who died actually was a well-known DJ in town. So it had gone through. So that's one thing. The other thing is,
Adrian and Karen, if you would summarize your thoughts.
Yep. So I'm going to say one other issue that we're running up against, and one that we should probably be thoughtful about, is the FERPA protections for students. So as teachers are using the kind of Google Classrooms and these other platforms, students' private information in terms of grades and feedback on assignments is not private. Often it's public feedback, so everyone can see public grading. And I know at least here, teachers haven't necessarily been trained or I'll say, on protecting students' privacy in an online environment. So because they're using, and so again, this isn't teachers not wanting to, it's just it's happened after the fact. You're like, oh, so I've heard from a number of teachers that's been an issue, particularly teachers who are team teaching. They haven't quite worked out the privacy issues. So.
Wow. Well, thank you both. Well, thank you to Karen and to Adrian for going into that. As someone who's based in New York City, I'd just like to say the sort of level of realness that you just brought to this conversation feels very familiar to me in terms of, as someone who was raising alarm bells as well and being treated in a similar way that you described your son being treated. It's real, and we're starting to learn and hear about people that we know and love who are ill. So our next speaker is actually a friend of mine for the last almost 20 years, I think, huh, Jesse? Jesse Hagopian is an ethnic studies teacher in Seattle, and he is an editor of Rethinking Schools magazine, and is on the steering committee, is that right, for Black Lives Matter at school.
All right.
Jesse, can you take it away?
Thanks so much, Monique, and thank you to Mercedes for helping to organize this, and to everybody. My heart really goes out to you all. I know these are challenging times. They have been for me. Hearing about the conditions in New Orleans really hit home, because I just found out before I got on this call that my cousin in New Orleans just contracted COVID. And, you know, we're really hoping she pulls through. She's, you know, over 60 and has had pneumonia before. And this is a scary time, and so much is changing. So it means a lot to be part of this community with you all, to figure out how we can collectively confront this crisis. And it's been hard on me and my family. My wife is in public health, and she's been pulled into the response here and is working 7 days a week, late into the night every day, trying to help flatten the curve. And so I want to talk about my experience working in the struggle with public education here in Seattle. And it's been a challenge because we were at first the epicenter in the United States in this region. We had the outbreak happen at a nursing home near Seattle that led to many elderly people dying all at once, and it was spreading in our region, and yet it hadn't hit a lot of the US yet. And so people in other areas weren't as alarmed as we were about how this was really going to cause a dramatic impact on our communities. And so it felt very strange for a while to be isolated, and it's of course much worse to see it now having the same impact and greater in places all across the country. But some of the specific challenges in our region are that we are in the shadow of Amazon and Microsoft and Boeing and Starbucks and some of the biggest corporations the world has ever known. There's seemingly a crane on every corner with new construction for unaffordable housing and office buildings. And yet in the shadow of all of this immense wealth, one of the wealthiest places the world has ever known, we have 40,000 homeless kids in Washington State. There are 150 homeless kids at the high school that I teach at. And it's just an obscenity that we can have that kind of disparity, and that really what this crisis does is reveal the many other crises of institutional racism and poverty that have existed for a long time in our area, that are now being exacerbated by this crisis. And so, you know, our school district did organize 25 sites to continue to provide food as the schools have been shut down. But, you know, the problem is that our homeless students don't only rely on schools for food. They also rely on them to do their laundry, for showers, right? And there's so many other service, whether it's counseling for trauma they've gone through, right? There's so many other services that our schools provide that are, you know, compromised with this mass school closure. And I think that has to be a big part of our demands moving forward. And I want to talk more about that in a moment. But I also just want to say a word about what it means to have the mass closure of schools across the country and around the world, because many people have been thrown into a situation where they're trying to continue their education, and there's a lot of pressure on parents to continue homeschooling in this time. And I think that we need to rethink the purpose and nature of education in this moment, and resist the endless worksheets and packets that are being sent home. You know, there's this idea that we're going to keep our kids on track and have them learn the curriculum that they would have learned here at home. And I think we have to reject that. We are on a whole different track in society. In fact, we've jumped the rails and are not on the track at all. And we need to actually see that the standard education that our kids were getting is not the most important thing right now. The students at home are learning all kinds of things about the world. They're learning about hygiene and how germs are spread. They're learning about social crises that make this disaster so much worse. And, you know, I'm doing home learning with my own kids. And, you know, I may have to leave this call early since my wife is gone and I have my kids at home. But, you know, my kids are learning an immense amount by using their phones to play hide and go seek with the FaceTime feature with their other friends that are siblings, right? They're finding ways to stay socially connected in this time of physical distancing. That's an education in and of itself, right? And my kids are finally getting time to do art at home, right? So they're doing drawing. There is no art teacher at my school, my son's school, because there isn't enough funding for art in the schools. So we're doing art in school, and we're spending time riding bikes around while practicing social distancing outside, but still riding bikes outside. And my kids are finally getting a decent amount of recess, which has been eroded throughout the years, especially for kids of color, as this test prep factory model is being imposed on public education. Recess has dried up in many of our schools to get them ready for the next high stakes standardized test. And, you know, many of us were putting forward the demand, we want COVID tests, not standardized tests. And thankfully, you know, finally the federal government no longer is requiring those high stakes tests. But I think the real victory will be to make that permanent, because we know that these high stakes standardized tests have been part of reproducing institutional racism ever since they were first imposed on the public school system by eugenicists, open white supremacists in the early 1900s. And then so what I want to really emphasize with my time here today is that this is an important moment where education is going to change, and the question is how and who is going to direct that change, because we know the disaster capitalists who are getting ready to roll out a shock doctrine program that they have been wanting to do for some time in Naomi Klein's formulation, right? And so they have been pushing high stakes standardized testing and privatization with charter schools and vouchers as the sharpest edge of the corporate education reform agenda. But one of the next pieces that they have been wanting to get implemented for some time is replacing teachers with online learning, right? They want to have kids maybe sit in rooms with one teacher to 100 or more kids on computers doing e-learning. And now there are many ed tech companies, I'm sure, just salivating at this moment, trying to figure out how to profit from this disaster. But at the same time that they are getting ready with a vision for how to profit off of our public education system and our kids, there's an opportunity for us to organize a national and international struggle that's built up of educators, parents, students, community members linking arms for a whole different vision of what public education can be. It seems to me like more than ever, we have an opportunity to say that the purpose of public education should not be to eliminate wrong answer choices on a multiple choice test, but to solve real life problems that affect our communities and our society. And so, you know, I think redefining pedagogy and problem-based learning in this time is so important. I also think that we have a real opportunity to push for the community school models and to put forward national demands in our unions around implementing community schools. Who among us will argue after this crisis that every school should not have a nurse, right? Who is that person going to be? I think that we have an unprecedented moment where we could put forward national demands that the federal government has to ensure that every single school has a nurse, but not just a nurse a school social worker. The kind of trauma that our kids are going to be emerging from being isolated from each other, and sometimes being stuck in abusive homes or many difficult situations at home, is going to be real, and they're going to need increased services for trauma and counseling. And
Jesse,
now is
could
the
you
time.
please summarize your thoughts?
Absolutely. Now is the time to advance a program about supporting all of our students, especially Black and Brown students and low-income students and homeless students who have been neglected for so long. And I think with the people we have on this webinar and other educational leaders around the country, we could put forward those list of demands for how to implement community schools that have wraparound services that will support our kids' physical, emotional, and social well-being in a way the schools never did. So I hope to be part of that struggle with you all in the future.
Thank you so much, Jesse. I'm not used to not being in a room where people start applauding uproariously afterwards, so it takes some getting used to. So if Seattle was one of the first places in the United States to start seeing the outbreak, New York is now in many ways the epicenter of it, because our local governments were completely negligent and unable to take the steps needed to flatten the curve. And we're going to see the impacts of that in the coming days, weeks, and months. And so our next speaker is a friend of mine who's also in New York, Gia. Gia Lee is a 4th and 5th grade teacher in New York. She is a leader of the Movement of Rank and File Educators, which is a caucus in the United Federation of Teachers that's fighting for rank and file democracy. She is a member of the National UCOR network, as well as Black Lives Matter at School in New York City. Gia is going to speak about our successful Walkout campaign here in New York City and give a sense of what's happening here now.
Thanks, Monique. And I think Monique and I can speak to what's going on in New York City. I'm in New York City, but basically just to give a little context. So yeah, like Monique said, nationally I just looked it up, it's something like 110,000 cases. New York has about 52,000 of those cases, with a large percentage of those basically in New York City. We had about over 500 deaths here since the outbreak. It's, I don't know, exponentially growing, and I can't name a single person who doesn't know someone who has contracted COVID-19 here. And taking it seriously enough is an issue that we've had with our local government. It can come off in the broad sphere, if you're watching what's happening in New York, that our governor is taking serious strides on this. It's more about grandstanding against our president. The reality is things are not moving fast enough. And specifically for us as teachers, I remember the first week of March when we started to hear that cases were becoming like rumored in specific schools, high schools in particular, one in the Bronx and one in Brooklyn. Those cases were reported, but New York City's policy at that time, the mayor's policy was, if there was a known case, they would shut the school down for 24 hours. That was the same like in Canada, but it didn't happen. And the reason why those schools were not shut down was because they weren't certified or official tests, which is ridiculous to us that they wouldn't even consider whatever test was available. And we all know the availability of tests is very difficult to know. It was an official FDA approved test, so that school was kept open. And now we're finding from those schools there are several cases. positive cases, a few deaths already, administrators, teachers who've died in New York City. Who knows at this point, it's what the numbers are. It's just really hard to tell. And I think we can all say that wherever we are. If there's anything that's become clear is what's essential and what's not. And I think just like Jesse and everyone on this call has been saying, is this is the time to really seize that opportunity and not let people who are not in positions on the front lines in this kind of space to say what's essential and what is not. There's a Slate article about what policies are really clearly not needed, like standardized testing, things that have to do with tenants' rights. Just to speak quickly a little bit about the walkout that Monique alluded to. So that after that first week, we heard about these cases, and then teachers were feeling like, we're not getting any word from the mayor's office, from the chancellor's office. Basically, every single press conference was about how there was no plans to close the schools, which was crazy to us. We couldn't understand why. So we were going to our union leadership, posing these questions, and the union was pretty quiet for a little while. And then they said they were going to go negotiate, because I think they were starting to hear the rumors of these positive cases. At first, it was just, we're just going to agree to disagree that they should close the schools. And we're like, that's it. A week later, this is the week of Friday the 13th. Friday the 13th landed on the actual day when the Moore Caucus started to organize with those schools to do a mass sick out on the following Monday. Monique was a big part of that organizing. Several members of our Moore steering committee and leadership were part of organizing that. And I'm gonna tell you right now that the webinar that was created had over 500 people in New York City interested in participating, getting information on how to organize sick out for that Monday, even with a statewide Taylor law, which made it illegal for us to go on any kind of job action. People felt this is life or death, and it was a risk that we were gonna have to discuss and possibly do. So at that point, it got onto the news. The pressure started to build. The union then declared that they were going to file a lawsuit against the city if they didn't shut the schools down. But by Monday, we found out Sunday night that the schools were going to be closed. So we didn't have time to prepare. That week though, so Monday they told us, treat it like a snow day. So no one comes to school, nothing to be done. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, however, staff were required to go back to school to do webinars, but practice social distancing in our school buildings where there are potentially, a number of cases that were already, widespread. We're a school system of 1.2 million students. It's the largest in the nation. And mass transit system. I mean, I can't even get into just the risks and the danger that we are putting ourselves in. I know that there was a follow-up call to see about holding an actual sick out with the staff. And for some reason it didn't go through. I think people were like putting the children first, is what I can fathom. But I really wish that we'd followed through with a sick out. That's my only, honestly, if there's any regret in this action, that we'd tried to get people to actually not go to work that week, because as a result, the following week, there were more positive cases coming out of schools. And what I would to say is there was some kind of a discussion group that was going on. Someone shared with me that this is a time that we should be talking about Maslow instead of Bloom. And in the past week, that's all the Department of Education here has been focused on, is making sure we have our Google Classroom set up. That they gave us this ridiculous timeline last week to have all of our remote learning plans for each and every one of our students with IEPs completed and submitted onto our IEP tracking system by Friday. So some of us had to organize around that and alert the union leadership that this was happening. The DOE agreed to extend the deadline, but there's a ridiculous amount of paperwork being put on us. We haven't slept because we're trying to learn these new platforms. I think I'm hearing a range of experiences across the board. And in some cases, there are administrators who are actually expecting teachers to invite them onto their whatever live Google Classroom or whatever they're doing to show proof and to actually start doing observations. It's a little intense. I had just to share a little tidbit before I take it back to Monique. I had a grade level team meeting yesterday. I teach at the Earth School. It's small. We're very progressive. We don't give grades. We were already on Google or Gmail accounts and Google Docs, so we had some familiarity. The learning curve for a lot of us, paraprofessionals, all the other learning teaching staff or non-teaching staff, trying to build community first was so important. But these mandates coming down from the Department of Education have been so burdensome. We started to share, we made space to just say, how have you been? How have you been mentally, emotionally? And one by one, each of my colleagues started to share how difficult it's been. Talking to either a family member who is elderly and they're the only person who is their caretaker, but they're afraid to go take care of them right now. One of my colleagues shared that his father sent his last will and testament because he doesn't expect to survive. Other people who have small children who are like completely disconnected from their friends. And we just like literally just started crying together. We just needed a moment to process and be there for our kids. So instead of forcing our kids to start completing assignments, we're like, let's just take some time and space to talk about what's going on, because the trauma is indeed going to be incredibly intense coming out of this.
Thank you, Gia. So I'm going to take some time now, and Mercedes is timing me too, so please, Mercedes, don't shy away from texting me. You can call me if I don't see it. So I just to sort of pick up where Gia left off about the situation here in New York. As educators in New York, I've just been really grasping to try to find out what is happening in other places, because it's such an important moment for us to like share notes, understand, and try to find ways to understand what's happening in a sort of totality, because we know that the people who run the society have no plan. They never have had a plan for how to take care of the well-being of ordinary people. And in a time of crisis like this, it becomes really pronounced. We're in the middle of an extreme economic crisis and global pandemic, but the people in charge of the society are just sort of plodding along in this sort of absurd way, you know, and talking about how our students shouldn't miss a week of school, and how as educators we have to keep high standards and expectations. And it's like they live on a different planet. It's like they're not living in a world in which people are getting sick and dying. It's like they're not living in a world in which our own family members and community members are not getting the medical care that they need. It's like almost as if they're living in a world in which they don't, you know, they don't struggle economically. And that is the world that the people who live in this, run this society live in, because they don't have to struggle. And I think I've been talking to my father a lot this week because I care for him. He lives with me. He has all of the risk factors that make somebody vulnerable in this situation. And he was saying to me, you know, Monique, the thing about a pandemic is that it reveals the real conditions of a society. And I think that's one of the things that we're really waking up to here in the United States, is that it's, you know, we have all these myths about the greatest democracy on earth and the greatest it's the greatest, richest and greatest society on earth. But what this pandemic is showing is the extreme inequality that is just right there. And when we were fighting for our lives and the lives of our students to try to slow down society, try to get schools closed in order to decrease the rate at which this thing is being spread, we were treated by educational leaders as hysterical women. We were treated as, as others today have said, as people who were scaring others and were getting out of their lane. But the reason that we had urgency is because we're actually connected to what's happening in schools, and the people who are so-called educational leaders are not connected to what's happening in schools. We've known that for a long time because every time they try to close our schools for low test scores and so on, and we list all of the social conditions that make it difficult for our schools to operate. They say those things don't matter. They say it doesn't matter that children are hungry and homeless. But when it's time to blame us for the crisis, they say that we don't care about our hungry and homeless students. And so, the situation in New York is acute. Nurses don't have the gear that they need to stay safe. Healthcare workers don't have the gear that they need to stay safe. Operating rooms are getting turned into ICUs. So people who even need critical surgeries right now that have nothing to do with COVID-19 are being told your surgery is canceled. We are on the cusp of a healthcare crisis that is unprecedented, and the people who run education are more concerned with so-called achievement and not having idle children walking around New York City, which is one thing that our mayor alluded to, than they are about the basic well-being of our students and our communities. And so I think, Silviana said earlier, we need to focus on the lives of our students. Jesse said earlier that there's going to be a battle over the future of education, and we have to put forward what we think it should be like. And I couldn't agree more with that right now, because educators in New York, and I'm sure in other places as well over the past week, have been told to focus their energies on all the wrong things right now. I'm all for connecting with my students. I'm working very hard to connect with my students. I'm open to learning new platforms to connect with my students and to do whatever I need to give them the support that I can from a distance. But what we need to be focusing on is the lives of our students, the lives of our community, and making sure that people have the basics that they need. I'm just going to point to two initiatives that I've seen others make that I think are really important starting places. In New York City, occupational therapists and physical therapists have put together an important document outlining some of their concerns. I'm sure other sectors of the population have done the same, and I just haven't seen them yet. But OTs and PTs for a fair contract put forward an important document that I'll put in the chat for people to look at. But they talk about this shock doctrine of education that's happening right now, and folks should also keep in mind Naomi Klein's idea of the shock doctrine was developed by activists in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria to talk about the trauma doctrine. What are the ways in which those in power will use our trauma and will use natural disasters and turn them into unnatural disasters in which they come out on top? And you should read this document because they talk about the specific ways that that's happening for therapists. We need to continue to develop these ideas and come up with what we're going to do, because this is not a time for us to do things that don't make sense for our students. This is not a time for us to do things that don't make sense for our families and for our communities. And I'll just finish on something that a friend of mine on Facebook who's a teacher in Philadelphia, Adam Sanchez, put out. I'm sure many of you saw it because it's been circulating quite a bit, but he put forward a number of demands that I think are a really important starting point for us to both do what needs to be done right now, but also say some things about what those who are in power over our jobs and lives are doing. And I'll just go through it, and again, I can figure out how to post it for folks to see, but he talks about the following things. First of all, we need to have schools officially closed for the rest of the year. Some of these politicians out here are talking about maybe going back in April. I don't know, again, what world they live in, but that's going to be at a moment when we have like 1,000 people a day dying, and that's not going to be possible. So we know that they want to put the economy first, but we have to say we have to put the lives of our communities first. Number two, everyone who works at a school should be receiving training in restorative justice and helping others through trauma and loss. Again, I said it already, I won't go into it, but we're about to enter into an unprecedented time in the lives of our students, our own families, our own communities. And as educators, we need to bone up on how we can be more supportive in those ways. Everyone, number three, demand that school leaders acknowledge and stop ignoring that remote learning exacerbates inequalities that already exist. That means that grades should not matter right now. That means attendance should not be mandatory. That means that no one should be punished for not being able to keep up with the quote unquote scope and sequence of the school year when their family is spiraling in and out of crisis in this moment. Number four, demand that compassion and understanding towards students be extended towards teachers as well. Number five, get rid of grades for the semester. Number six, less and more meaningful work for everybody. This relates to what the important work Jesse and others have been doing around pedagogy and what is learning in this moment, and how that needs to be connected to the histories of our communities, and go back to learn about what people before us have done to stand up to adversity so that they can inform ourselves going forward. So Mercedes just told me I have 1 minute, so I'll end it there. But I just wanted to, again, thank Mercedes Martínez of the Federación de Maestros, of the Teachers Federation of Puerto Rico, for organizing this. Like I said at the beginning of the call, it's not an accident or a coincidence that they were able to jump into action around this when many of us in other places were still reeling just with the past week and 2 weeks of developments. And we know it's because you've been going through the kind of crisis that we have now for the past several years in the wake of Hurricane Maria, after the recent earthquakes, and with the colonial junta that has been attacking your rights and your lives for several years now. So thank you for taking the initiative, Mercedes, to organize this and to reach out to us and to create this international network that we're, listening to and hearing from right now. It's so invaluable to have you and to know you've done that work and that you've learned so many lessons from that. And we're really just touched by your solidarity. And Mercedes is going to speak now on what's happening in Puerto Rico, and hopefully can give us some insight into your struggles. Thank you.
Thank you, Monique. Can you hear me? Yes. It's after all of those words that you just said, I am out of words for the first time. It was very moving and touching to hear to all of you. I thank all of you for taking from your time. We are all extremely busy. We are tired. We are going through so much, and we took the time to get together from different parts of the world to talk about what's going on. So I really appreciate everyone saying yes, and all your statements here. They have been very powerful. I am going to share something on the screen. I don't know if you guys see it. Let me try to see if I can. Monique, can you tell me if you see it? Because I don't see the screen right now. Yep, okay. So I just want to talk a little bit about what's happening in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico has been going through so much, as Monique stated. 2 years ago, we went through a Category 5 hurricane. We still have 20,000 people living under blue tarps at this moment, people whose homes have not been fixed by this time. And it was the heroic teachers and communities and allies that came through that made schools reopen. And disaster capitalism started then by our ex-Secretary of Education, trying to shut down hundreds of schools, trying to privatize our schools in such a moment. After we won some of those battles, this year we started with an earthquake on the 7th of January. And we have children from different towns of the South, particularly, that have not begun school the entire semester. We have over 15,000 students in Puerto Rico that at this moment were not able ever to go back to school from the second semester after the hurricanes because the schools were pretty much very damaged and the government did not have a response to provide secure spaces and locations for our students. So imagine going through such a trauma and now this pandemic, our children and our teachers are in need of so much help and assistance emotionally. And for me, it's just annoying observing how the government's response has been exactly almost the same as every other country. Remedial modules, teachers got to work online, not caring about the health, physical and mental health of our people in our country. So in March 8th, it was International Workers' Women's Day. There was a huge march in Puerto Rico. That day we had a cruise ship that came in, 1,800 tourists got off. One of them was the first case of COVID-19 in Puerto Rico. It was an Italian tourist. She was taken to a hospital, but the government of Puerto Rico did not take the precautions and let everyone out of the cruise ship. So they wondered in San Juan, the march was in San Juan. So you can imagine how many people that showed no symptoms met with people from our country. So that's where the spreading started. In March 9th, the first case was confirmed and it was that tourist. And by the 13th, we already had 3 cases. The Federación has been working with allies, other teacher unions at this time, like UNETE, and we wrote a letter to the governor stating that schools needed to be shut down immediately. On the 13th, the Secretary of Education stated that he was not going to shut them down because he was not going to listen to the OMS, that he was going to listen to the CDC, and that the OMS had no say in our country. So you can imagine what we're dealing with as terms of health and education here. Regardless of what he said, the governor that night took our advice and decided to shut down the school system. 2 days after, they announced a lockdown. So we have been on a lockdown for the past 2 weeks. We're only allowed to go out to the street if we're going to go buy groceries at the store, to the pharmacy, to the doctor's office, or to the hospital. And some statistics have said that we have 500 people that have been arrested for breaking the curfew. We have 400 complaints that have been filed by the police, and we have only had 1,600 tests done on the population. So they're criminalizing the people instead of providing the COVID test that needs to be given to the entire population of our country. And March 21st, we had the first confirmed death of COVID in our country. And by today, we have 100 cases that have been confirmed. But the way that our government has handled this has been, from the beginning, totally irresponsible. Anybody can come in through the airports. There's no screening at the airports. They just started screening the airports like a week ago, and they're just taking people's temperature. But nobody is calling the people that came in. They were not required to be in quarantine. They have just been required as of a week ago, and we don't know who's following up on that because they have no information on who's doing that work. So hundreds of planes have arrived. Being a colony of Puerto Rico, the governor has no authority to shut down the airport. And the way they've handled this, we know we have many more cases than what's been stated by the media. We have a public system, a health system that was privatized in the 1990s. So it's in pretty bad shape. Everything that Monique stated, that the nurses and health staff in New York are going through is the same thing that the health staff is going through in Puerto Rico. Not enough PPEs for themselves, not enough beds in the hospitals, not enough ventilators for people to get sick. So if it's spread, we don't know what we're going to do. We demanded right now by the government of Puerto Rico to provide laptops and internet access for every one of our students, more than to give classes, but to get in touch with them and to provide them with technology so they can talk to their teachers, to their peers, to see how they're doing, to give each other support, because a lot of our children don't have access to technological equipment. We did a survey, as you can see in the screen, and 67% of our students do not have a computer at home. Of our teachers, I'm sorry, 67% of the teachers have a computer at home, 30% or so don't have one. The computers that they have were not given by the Department of Education, only 10% were given by the department. So teachers as yourselves are using their own equipments. 70% of the teachers almost have internet access, 30% don't. So we have 30% of the teaching professionals that have no way of communicating with the students technologically if it's not by phone right now. As of our students, 64% of them do not have any computers, and this is from a survey of 2,100 students that answered. The same amount of students almost don't have internet or Wi-Fi access at home, so it's the majority of the students. And this is very alarming because the Department of Education is saying everybody to get in line, to get online, to work online, and not teachers or students have the equipment to get online. So we have a $9 billion reserve. We have a $9 billion reserve right now to pay an odious debt that's not ours. And we have a colonial fiscal board that was appointed by Barack Obama, whose severe austerity measures against our people have made that we have such an amount. This amount has been possible because of all those cuts that we have been receiving since 2016. So we are demanding right now that money to be released, to be used in this pandemic disaster, to provide, to build a hospital, to purchase ventilators, to provide medical equipment to our professional health staff, to provide professionals of health for our students, to provide a nurse for every school right now that we don't have. We propose in the legislature resolution 646 that everybody, almost everyone has a television in Puerto Rico. We made this bill, we made it by petition with other organizations, and we are requiring the public television, the national television of Puerto Rico channel to be used for education, for providing different courses for our students through the television, but courses that include social workers in it to talk about emotional health in times of crisis, to provide workshops for teachers to work during trauma and after trauma. So we are having this bill being voted on next week. We demanded mortgage payments to be on a moratorium, personal loans, and that has been approved. Utilities cannot be suspended, that was approved. They try to privatize remote learning in the Department of Education right now through this pandemic. It's no surprise. We, even in quarantine, were able to have a massive movement of teachers opposing to this and the people of Puerto Rico. So the legislator that proposed the bill had to withdraw it, and we are not being privatized by the remote learning right now. We have so many children that need to be fed. 56% of our children live under poverty levels. We are requiring food banks for all of them. The government has not given in to that one, so we still have a lot to go on. An economic stimulus package that we have been requested was approved yesterday, so that's going to be something good for the working class, but we know what's coming on. We just had 2,000 hotel workers laid off last week. We know that more layoffs are going to come. We know that they did a labor reform for the private sector that's going to make them have massive layoffs to rehire them with no benefits. So we are in a huge fight, and mainly we are in a fight for our lives, for our health. 2 of my children work in fast food restaurants, and my heart just beats. You can't imagine whenever they go out that door, because these fast foods keep making profits using our children. And the government can shut down anything but not them, because our children's life don't matter. So I told them not to go to work. They have to be protected. we are a family and we are here for them, but that's not possible for other working children that depend on their income and whose facilities have not been shut down and are not essential services. So we are fighting very hard on that. And I took this print screen that you see when we started the call, I think. The beautiful thing about this is as you see on the screen right now, we are all in this together. We are facing disaster capitalism in hormones right now, but we have each other's back. We have the same demands, and we can work together as one working class to make anything that we want possible. So I will end my participation with this, and let me see if I can go back to stop sharing. Okay. We can, Monique, you can take it from here if you want, and we have a lot of messages in the chat that we have 20 minutes to sum up. If anybody wants to say anything else, if we want to answer questions, I'm just so happy to see all of you, because seeing your faces gives me strength to continue fighting.
Mercedes, we feel the same way, and there's more than 40 participants on here still right now who've been putting questions into the various ways that you could put questions in. Honestly, I didn't plan very much past this point of the conversation. It's a big learning curve doing this. And so we'll have to kind of put our heads together to see how we can spend the next 20 minutes responding. Maybe somebody could look through some of the questions that are coming out and, you know, pull a few out that you think you might be able to address. There's a Q&A box. There's participants. People are speaking up. Yeah, Jesse, did you want to say something?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to leave. My kids are in need of me now. Thank you so much, Mercedes and everybody. And I just thought I'd leave by saying one thing before I go, which is that on Monday we're going to release a creative response project as a prompt for all the students in Seattle to answer. And it's about how COVID-19 impacts the most vulnerable communities in Seattle. So how does it impact women, given that they're the vast majority of healthcare workers? How does it impact those who are incarcerated? How does it impact the homeless? How does it impact Chinese Americans and Asian Americans, given the racism and stigma that they're facing? So we have these different prompts that they can respond to, and they can create videos or posters, drawings, write letters, and we're going to collect them all and send them to the politicians in our area and collect them online. And once we post that, it's something that you all could replicate and just plug in different data sets for supporting their work from different areas. And it could help unite educators together in a common purpose for an education during this time that isn't about worksheets. So I'll leave you all with that idea, and I wish you all well.
Hi, Jesse. Good to see
Thank
you.
Jesse.
Take care, everybody.
So we have a message here from Violet. She's from Canada. She's a friend of Julia. She says, as a teacher in Canada, a colleague of Julia's and a union executive, I agree we have an amazing opportunity to recapture education, to use Karen's words, and to make it better, more relevant. And I'm trying to look, my computer just froze there. To today's students, also Jesse should suggest it. Are there any good models of community schools? Community schools that you know of? What literature can you recommend? If we are rethinking, my computer keeps moving. Can somebody see the entire message? Are there any good models of community schools that you know of? What literature can you recommend? If we are rethinking schools, is it necessary to keep distinct subjects, for example? Who has done this work out there, and who can we draw on instead of having to reinvent the wheel separately? I don't know if anybody can talk about that. Sara, I see you. And Gia.
Well, in Chicago, for the past few years, we won our not this past contract fight, but the contract fight before, we won 20 community schools. And so the amazing thing about that is they receive extra funds. They're connected with community organization. A lot of these community organizations have been our allies. We've been working with them for a long time. And they choose kind of how they want to use that money, whether it's for restorative justice coordinators, social workers. The community organizations also do a lot of projects with the students, with the families. And it's been a really great process. We're trying to expand it throughout the city. And obviously we want all schools to be community schools. But so far in those models where it's been happening in these schools, it's been successful.
Thank you. Yeah, I know you wanted to say something.
Yeah, just to add on to Sarah's, I know that in some places community schools kind of alludes to not so privatization. However, in the realm of, you know, community schools in terms of developing community autonomy around what education looks like. I teach in a very progressive public elementary school where we, for the past 30 years, we don't give grades. We do a very different approach to curriculum development that centers the students and culturally responsive pedagogy. And what that entails and what that can look like differs. There's the Progressive Education Network, where a majority of the schools are independent or private, but there are seeds in there of ideas for what it can look like in a truly democratic space. And I think that there's a lot of literature on that. I did want to respond to something about outreach at this point, and I know that I was just on a call through labor notes with other sectors, other labor sectors who also want to develop a list of demands, collective demands that are all around, like all the things that we were just talking about. And this is the potential for us to collectivize, not just within public education or education itself, but as the working class, as the 99%. I do want to share that the reason why any online tool or platform is working right now for us is because we developed those community spaces with our students and with our families in person for many months prior to this. It's not something you can just replicate cold. So that's something that we have, and we have to keep on pushing what we know in order to push down those initiatives that are coming.
So there are a number of questions here, and Mercedes is doing a good job of trying to go through them. Mercedes, can you list some of them for us?
Yes, there is a section that's called Q&A. Actually, I just noticed. I have Jackson Potter from Chicago. He's saying, can we get a link to the New York Educator Statement from the Clinician Work Group? Could be useful to us to steal in Chicago. So that's more about. Then at the same time, Jackson is saying as well, Mercedes and others, any suggestions about how to best conduct outreach for mutual aid and support to parents while we are on quarantine? Somebody wants to answer that one?
I would just like to say something quick about that. I don't have the answer to that, but one thought I had about it is I'm wondering if in places like where the Federación has in Puerto Rico done important work to bring, for example, supplies to the southwest of the island after the earthquakes, and in cities where reform caucuses have actually won the unions that they were organizing inside of, like in places like LA and Chicago, where you actually have much more access to the resources of the union, as opposed to in places like New York, where we're a baby caucus, and our unions are not always playing the role that they need to play. Maybe is there a way for us to hear from those kinds of places on what you are actively doing to give us ideas from that?
Okay, good. I have another question from Ervin Lopez from Chicago. Hi, Ervin. Hope you're still there. He says, hello. First, solidarity from Chicago. Love you all. What is New York and New Orleans doing to reach out to Spanish-speaking families and connecting them with resources. So that's directed to New York and New Orleans.
I can say that for New Orleans, we tentatively partner with an organization called Dols to support Spanish-speaking students, and there's young people who organize with an organization called Puente. So we partner with them in order to provide resources and support to Spanish-speaking students. We also have like a very large Vietnamese population in New Orleans. So we also partner with a couple of Vietnamese organizations to provide support to Vietnamese-speaking students.
And I can say in terms of, because I'm also a member of the United Teachers of New Orleans Union, and I sit as a rep for our Greater New Orleans Eros chapter, and we are a coalition of folks. So we do have a group of, we have a representative from a group that's organizing workers and workers from a number of industries, but mostly the kind of day laborers and hotel and restaurant workers, some of whom are Spanish speaking, some of whom are undocumented, and quite it's international in terms of its representation of nationality. So we have Hondurans, we have a number of folks who have come from Honduras, Mexico, and I want to say Guatemala, but I'm not certain on that, but certainly Honduras and Mexico. So we've had an influx of folks who come in. So we have some representation from there and some engagement. Not much representation and engagement with adults who are Vietnamese, but certainly with our comrades who are day laborers.
In terms of what's going on in New York, it's literally school by school. It depends, and we have our school system is divided into community education councils or districts, and depending on the community education council, I know, like, I'm in District 1, and we have a very active president and panel of people who are supporting those families. But it's hard to tell what's going on in other places. I do know that there are migrant worker coalitions and organizations like Make the Road that are not necessarily connected to government, that are supporting families as much as they can. And if parents and families even know about those resources, you know, that's a fortunate thing. If not, there's no coordinated leadership around that.
Yeah, and I want to add about New York. Well, not directly New York, but I want to thank Monique. Monique has been my helper all this time. She translates any news that's happening in Puerto Rico. When we talk about mutual aid, anything I read in Spanish, she translates without even me asking. So everybody can read what's happening here thanks to her. And I'm so grateful for all that help that Monique has given me. So I just wanted to put it out there about Spanish-speaking people. And we have some more questions here. Okay, Pauline Lipman. Hey, Pauline. Pauline is a dear friend from Chicago. She's from the Teachers from Social Justice Caucus, and she's a professor at the University of Illinois. It says, Mercedes, can you talk about how you organize while under curfew? Thank you all. Well, there was a bill, 2448, that was going to be approved to privatize remote learning and promoting that every student would take courses online every semester in the curriculum as soon as we start going back to school. Since we are on curfew, we can't go protest. So we did digital organizing. It was very hard because we can't go out. We created a change.org petition that had thousands of signatures in a couple of days. We made a press release about the sense of capitalism and how they wanted to take advantage of the time and the moment and the suffering of the people. And the press release got out to the entire country. We had a call out to the, we call it llamatón in Spanish. I don't know how you call it in English, but we had phone banking to thousands of teachers that were calling the legislature. We swamped their emails, asking them to withdraw it. We wrote a letter to the governor. We made videos and posted them. So it was all about digital organizing because we cannot go out, but they felt the pressure. Remember in Puerto Rico, the same as the US, this is election year. They want to get reelected. So that holds, that makes the pressure enough for them at this moment. They care about what we have to say. So that was basically it. And I have another one here that says that this is Rosemary Lee. She's from the UTLA. Oh, hi, Rosemary. Rosemary's saying, and she's from the Tri-National. So Julia can talk about this. She's saying, what about us organizing digital platforms of our own for organizing, like debtcollective.org, rentstrike.ca? What do you think about that, Julia? You're muted.
Organizing our own digital platforms? I haven't ever thought of that. I mean,
yeah.
Well, I think we should start having a lot more virtual meetings like this. I think this is super powerful. I mean, if we're most of us stuck in isolation for the next several months, we have every Saturday free.
Yes.
We could have all kinds of meetings like this, and I think we should do more and more of this. It'll really help us stay focused on what could happen. It'll help us think about, you know, if in one jurisdiction there are some victories, then you can demand the same. You know, always be ready to use that whipsaw. Yeah.
Yes, and finally, Monique, I'm sorry. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, in addition to the work that organizations like the FMPR have done in Puerto Rico, I've also really looked to a lot of the mutual aid solidarity networks that were set up, like the Comedores Sociales in Puerto Rico, where people after the hurricanes pooled their resources to cook. Now, of course, it's a different situation when we're not allowed to congregate, but I think it gives us some ideas for how we are going to need to think about mutual aid in new ways. This is not necessarily connected to myself as an educator, but I just started an email list of some of my neighbors, you know, to look out for each other, send out an email, hey, I ran out of toilet paper, can anybody spare one, to things that are more serious, like my elderly neighbor who doesn't know how to get food right now, right? So these kinds of, and obviously we're not assembling when we do that, we're communicating by email, we're dropping something off on the front porch and sending a text that it's there, right? So we're gonna have to think, you know, the problem that we face is that our side's strength is in our collectivity, and that we can't be together, but we can still find ways to be collective.
That was actually the last question. Alaida was talking about giving examples of mutual aid, and she was talking about Centro de Apoyo Mutuo, which cooked for the entire community, something like Comedores Sociales, and a lot of activities that have been done, and organizations that were auto-sustainable organizations, community organizations that came in Puerto Rico after the hurricane. We have a link with all of them and the work they do in different aspects that I can share on Facebook with you. I would like to thank everyone for being here, but I don't want anybody to leave without saying some final words, thoughts, because we still have people we still have attendees, so I would like to hear some final words from each one of you. We can go as I see you on my screen. Julia is the first one. I see them.
Okay, thanks. I just think it's great to be able to see all of you. My heart is just broken for the situation in New Orleans and in New York. It's just like absolutely horrifying. I mean, we've a couple people have mentioned about nurses in schools, and that's it's so interesting to me to hear that, because we have that demand as a very latent demand here, but it's because we have public health care. And so now we're seeing the benefit of public health care and the benefit of the centrally organized public health care. It's like, we closed the border, we did all kinds of things, and hopefully it's going to help us here. But then, in the bigger picture, we need to support each other to have these demands. So, oh boy, I mean, we're in tough times, and I just wish you all good luck with your schools, within your unions. Like, try not to be irritated by each other. That, it's a union. You don't have to all be friends, but we have to focus on the goals and stay true to the cause. It's a time to do that. That would be my comment. Thanks so much, Mercedes, and it's really great to see you as well again.
It's always great to see you and talk to you. I have Gia.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much. It's so great. I can't tell you, it's been really depressing, and this call, I think, has really boosted, I don't know, this, a light in a dark time. But I guess what I would want to just share is, and for all of us to like really think about, is how we continue this in a really concrete way, and start to really focus on developing locally what our demands would look like specifically. I know that it's not going to be easy with all the different demands coming and pulling us in different directions, but that we take care of ourselves so that we can take care of each other. And this is the opportunity. If anything has been any clearer about what's important and what's not important, is that corporations and Wall Street should not be getting bailouts. It's the everyday workers, and that be just heralded really loud and clear. And I want to just say I love you all, and I can't wait till we continue this.
Thank you so much, Gia. We have Silvana.
I want to say thank you first to you, Mercedes. But also I'm reflecting about all the things that you were talking about, because, here in Chile, just the 35% of students are in public schools. The rest are in charter schools, right? So most of our families are just women alone with the kids. So it's very hard for us to talk about communities because we don't have community schools. We are just working on that to form a group of women to support their kids in their homes now in this crisis. So for us here in Chile and Valparaiso, it's very important to share our experiences and also to see what is happening in your countries. So we have to be in touch all the time because this is not easy to deal with. And we are teachers, so we know how to deal with different difficulties. And thank you, Mercedes, and all the participants here. Thank you very much.
Mercedes, you're muted.
I'm sorry. I was saying we have Adrian. Thank you so much, Silvana.
Adrian, would you like to unmute and say a few final words?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, this was a great opportunity to share and hear what other folks are dealing with. We're trying to just curate information because everything is so decentralized. So I've actually been trying to, I have a Google Doc just for educators in New Orleans to try to curate what folks are doing and how students can plug in. So that's what we're working with, but great to talk to you guys. I hope we can do this again.
Thank you so much, Adrian. I know Karen left because I don't see her here. And we have Sara.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Mercedes for setting this up. It's been just so interesting listening on how the scenarios look different all over the US, all over the world. It was really heartbreaking to hear a lot of your guys' stories, because I think you know, since we're isolated right now, it's like, oh my God, it's so horrible here. But hearing about New Orleans and New York and, you know, what you guys are going through, I can't imagine. And it also makes me really grateful to be part of a strong union. You know, I know those that are not unionized. I know a lot of the charters, for example, that aren't unionized are going through a lot. I mean, I would even recommend, like we have some unionized charters here. I would recommend there being a, you know, charter school teacher chat on how to organize and fight back. I know they're getting some crazy demands there as well. And there are some that are unionized. I know we have at least like 38 in Chicago. I think now is one of those times, it's interesting because we are isolated, but through a lot of these Zoom calls and different things, I felt more connected to some people than I have in a long time. So I think that's kind of the silver lining of some of this. And because depending on the situation and what people are at, some people might have more time to participate in some of these Zoom calls and what can we do trainings on and workshops on. I know even with Chicago among special educators, we've been giving all these special education know your rights trainings, and we were giving them in person. We were saying we should give one, you know, a local one and a national one. We have these PowerPoints on, you know, special ed laws and on how in Chicago, for example, we organized and fought back and we won a lot for special ed. I mean, I would love to hear other, you know, cities and different organizing they've been doing and how they've won or lessons they've learned. So it'd be great to stay connected and talk through those things. And I would love to see, you know, maybe this group maybe have this kind of thing every 2 to 3 weeks or every month, and have some more cities, you know, speak as well. I would love to also hear from those countries that have sanctions, you know, like Iran and Venezuela, you know, that the US still is imposing these sanctions is horrifying, what they're going through, and many are dying due to the US government sanctions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for being here. We have Monique.
So another thing about the Federación de Maestros in Puerto Rico is that they've led the way in showing what it takes when you're a worker in a workplace, that and your union isn't necessarily doing everything that it needs to do to stand up for your rights. And they've led the way in doing that when they were the exclusive representatives of the teachers in Puerto Rico and when they aren't. And they, for example, after the earthquakes, the Mercedes and so many of the compañeros and compañeras in Puerto Rico led the way in showing us how to look closely at the situation in your locality and find the needs of the communities, of the school communities, identifying them. They worked with engineers after the schools were left either unusable or shouldn't be used, but as they continued to be used and pushed to be used by the government, even though they weren't safe anymore. And the FMPR worked with engineers in order to come up with a proposal. They organized, they lobbied, they put pressure to bear on the system. And it's an example of the kind of organizing that obviously is not exactly the same as what we need to do in places all over now, but it gives us a good example of what a rank and file needs to do, and a union that's oriented on a rank and file, or a caucus that's organized on a rank and file, and so on, needs to do to identify the problems and move forward. I'm not saying that I have all of those answers or that I've identified all of those things, but I think that here and in a number of other places we've begun to identify the problems. I didn't mention this earlier, but I'm an early childhood educator, and being an early childhood educator in the era of social distancing and remote learning is a very strange thing to do, because social distancing and remote learning isn't really great for anybody, but for 5-year-olds, it really, really doesn't work, because humans, and especially little humans, need human interaction. And I think the reality is I wake up every day and I remember what's happening as if it were like a loss or a death. And I think about, you know, my children and my students and how they're not going to have each other. And something that Silvana said about organizing groups of women, it really touched me, because right now when we're supposed to be, you know, organizing our online teaching from home, we're also taking care of our own children. We're also taking care of our own parents, whether it's because they live with us, which is the case with me, or they don't. And we're trying to take care of them from a distance. And so this is going to require us, I think, thinking about what is unionism in ways that go back to the very simple ideas that created unions. An injury to one is an injury to all, and what are we going to do about it? I'm just really, I feel very lucky to have comrades like you all and many people who aren't here to make these steps forward. I don't know how we're going to do that, but I think we're going to find ways to support each other and to organize and bring to bear the needs that we have and we see in our communities, because we're about to go through it. We're going through it, and we're about to go through it. And we're going to need each other now more than ever. And thank you to everybody on this call. I really appreciate all of you.
Well, after Monique saying all that, we don't have much more to say. We are all very touched by her words and by having each other. You know, I was actually looking at the screen and seeing all your faces. I said, wow, well, majority of us are women. I see a lot of panels online these days, and I see a lot of male faces. And I'm looking at all these faces, and we have majority of women organizers, leaders, mothers, teachers, activists. And
Mercedes, that's because you organized it.
Well, maybe. But I'm just so happy to see all of your faces and for all of your work and for caring for your students so much and for loving your students so much and for caring about your union brothers and sisters and for society and knowing that we literally have each other. It's not, in Spanish, we say nos tenemos, right? And it's not just a saying, it's an action, it's a verb, it's not a noun. We literally have each other. I met some of you through different platforms after the hurricane, through comrades that have been in the union that presented me to you guys. Monique took a plane here in Puerto Rico. I met Monique when she came after we have the hurricane. And I didn't even, this is the kind of person that she is, that I did not know Monique. She came to Puerto Rico. She was in the ISO by that time, I remember. And I just met her that day. And the next day she was in a school that had 6 feet of water and was totally destroyed. And I had Monique throwing garbage and cleaning the school with me without knowing her. And she was here in our country helping me clean the school to have it ready for the children. And that's the same story of all of you. I met Silvana in Journey for Justice through G2 Brown, and I am so grateful. Silvana we need a Secretary of Education like Silviana Sáez in Puerto Rico, in the country, in the world. Silvana is amazing, so I am just blessed. Sara, I've known her for years. Edwin and Rafi, she does such an amazing work. Sara has been repressed and she has fought back and won so much amazing battles. And I don't know a teacher that loves so much our special students like Sara and Yali, the love that they have for the students from the special ed program. It's just amazing. And it just tells a lot about you. I know Julia, so we can close with this. Julia is such an amazing person. I went to Canada. She invited me for a conference. I felt so much love from people I never met before when we were in a conference, and she had us in her home every day. She did not want us to be in a hotel. She wanted us to be taken care of as part of her family, and she provided a home for us, and she opened her doors. And they do such, she took me to the school, she took me to meet teachers. I got to see them on action. They were amazing teachers in Canada. So I am very happy to have known all of you. Karen does amazing work in New Orleans. She's a youth organizer, she's great. And Jesse's a great organizer as well for the Black Lives Matter. So tomorrow, that's the final thing. Tomorrow we're gonna have a live webinar. It's gonna be in Spanish. Silvana is going to be there. And Julia is going to be there. We're going to have Norma Perez from New York, and we're going to have Anaida Colon and Lucia and Julie Regalado from California. Their parents that are fighting against privatization, and a professor from the University of Chapman. So I'm going to send the link later on. I just didn't want people to get them missed. So if you want to listen to some Spanish webinar about organizing in times of COVID, tomorrow we're going to have that one. So thank you so much. There are people asking how they're going. There's a lot of links. I don't know if you saw them on the right side of the page. So before I end the meeting, I'm going to copy and paste them so we can have them online. They're usual aid kits, organizing kits, a lot of information, and people don't want to lose them. So I'm going to copy and paste them in the FMPR's page so everybody can have access to it later, okay? So thank you so much for being here, and looking forward to seeing you. And I'm going to take Julia on that. We have to meet each other more often.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mercedes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Monique.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone.
Thank you.
So
Everybody
good to
that
see
stayed
you
with
all.
us till the end. Thank you all the attendees.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Gracias.
thanks
Be
to everybody.
safe.
Be safe. I'm going to end it when I copy all this.
Okay.
But
Bye.
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 Bye-bye. Monique, you have to stay with me till the end because I'm copying this. You have to help me. Are you seeing it on the right side? Okay, here's one. Okay.
Yeah, I'm saving it. I don't know what happens when you save it, but you can save the chat.
Oh, yeah?
See,
Oh, that's
I don't-
easier then. How
Yeah.
can I save the chat?
You open the chat,
Okay.
and then oh boy.
Oh, it says chat saved.
Yeah, it says save, but I don't know where it saves. I guess maybe in your Zoom
My
account.
computer. Oh, but it's, yeah. Let me see. Oh, yeah, I have it all. Okay, so I can end it, and I'm gonna email this to you, and I'm gonna make it available for everybody so they can see it.
Wonderful.
All right, thank you. Silvana, te veo mañana a las 4, misma hora y mismo lugar.
Nos vemos. Saludos.
Gracias, un
Bye.
abrazo.
Placer conocerte.
Igual.
Bye, nos vemos.